Hi everyone.
Hi, I'm Dave.
And I'm Louis. We've been developers at Mayden for the best part of a decade now. We've seen the company grow from 15 members of staff to 70.
So we thought we'd share our experiences on working in an ever-changing development team with you in a company that's got a flat structure.
And there's lots of Mayden people around tonight.
So Mayden provides software for healthcare. We work on a large patient management system called IAPTIS. It was designed and built specifically for the IAPT initiative, and that stands for Improving Access to Psychological Therapies. And that was started with the aim to provide psychotherapy to more of the general population. It's a software as a service system with a mixture of doing bespoke projects for our customers while also completing projects for our own roadmap. And we're in a team of 20 developers divided over 3 Scrum teams, and nobody's in charge. We've got no managers, and we're expected to make our own decisions. We're not told how to do our jobs. Instead, we're accountable to each other, be that inside the Scrum team or from team to team.
So, and when we started, this is sort of 8 years ago, when we started we all got an area of the system to work on. So Dave's up the top there as a reports guy, and I'm the Flash expert over there, but I definitely wasn't an expert, and I'm glad that's burnt to death, but there you go. And after several years of working on the code base, there was a lot of frustration built up. And we had a hierarchy within the technical team, and that didn't really empower us to make any improvements to the system. And then we had a technical lead in the team who kind of was quite overbearing. No one would talk to each other. So like in the diagram, that's an example of what it was like. We all had our backs to each other, literally. Once your work was done, you were just encouraged to merge your code to master. And then the tech lead at the time would release whatever was in the master code base, kind of with no strategy or anything along those lines. So yeah, so the technical lead, as I said, acted as the system architect. All software design decisions had to run past him. And we couldn't add any more classes because the technical lead told us that there were enough already. So we had one class which controlled all of our display stuff. And let me tell you, there's a lot of stuff in that class which is not to do with display. And then we have close to a 10,000 line report class, which reporting obviously is quite a complex system. So to have the majority of it in one class is not right, but there you go. So he wasn't really qualified enough and didn't really have the authority to kind of, and really any justification for this. So all of this, along with a load of other things, meant for a big pile of spaghetti code.
At this point, all of our code was mashed together. So we had JavaScript being echoed out by PHP and HTML being echoed out by PHP. We had a mixture of JavaScript libraries, so we had bits in YUI, if anyone remembers that, and jQuery. None of it followed any modern standards, patterns, or best practices. We even had code that was evaled code. Time to complete a project was all over the place. We rarely managed to finish a project when we said we would, because there would be all these unforeseen issues related to running a legacy system. And it would completely blow up the project. So in addition to this, we would introduce bugs to live that we couldn't find during development. Parts of the system completely unrelated to the part we were changing would break, and it was really impossible to find it because we had such low test coverage. Over a period of 5 years, our development team kept growing and growing. And this led to a disorganized code base where most of the team had their preferred way of writing code. We'd not adopted any standards at this point, so our legacy code base was being improved by every developer in loads of different ways. And everyone had a different idea of what improving was, so things were really messy. This was leading to specialist areas of the system which were becoming difficult to debug by different members of the team. And there was absolutely no shared architectural vision, which meant overall progress to make feature development more streamlined and reduce technical debt just wasn't going anywhere.
So Scrum is new, well it was back then anyway. It will solve all our problems. No, it really didn't. Scrum takes a long time to master, and it kind of only exposes the problems you need to fix. Code was breaking once deployed, and we often had to cancel large amounts of the current sprint to accommodate. And it didn't fix the underlying issues with the way we developed code. However, Scrum was allowing people to step out their silos, so everybody was starting to talk to one another, and we could finally spread the knowledge out of the areas that we've been chained to.
We didn't realise at the time, but our release process was very primitive. When the both first started at Mayden, we were still syncing files via FTP client up to the live server. Developers just merged their code to the master code base when their development was finished, and we deployed whatever was there with no particular order or reason. At Mayden, one of our biggest challenges has been releasing software updates at the rate that we produce them, and delivering our updates to customers bug-free in a way that doesn't impact their working day. We've struggled through periods of releasing bug after bug to customers to the point where they would be terrified when we announced there was a deploy day coming up. And a huge amount of our time as developers was cleaning up the mess from the previous deploy. It's not that we didn't care about delivering updates reliably. It's just that we hadn't really identified what the cause was at this point.
So in summary, we had an overbearing technical lead. Team members weren't talking to one another. No release strategy or process for that matter. We'd spend hours releasing something that should take a few minutes. No forward thinking in development strategy or architectural planning. Feature development took far longer than it should. And we were continuing to work as if we were a small team, but actually we had people joining us all the time. And we hadn't got anywhere close to grasping Scrum.
So one day, after another morning of arriving to work, to phone calls about the system being down, which just happened to come over after another deploy night, it got to the point where we realised it really wasn't acceptable to our customers to be getting this kind of service. We had to make some drastic changes in order for anything to really move on.
So we hadn't officially transitioned to a flat structure at this point, but nobody was doing anything about the problems. So we thought, well, let's try and do something about it. We had no idea what we were doing at the moment, at the time, but we knew something had to be done. And especially because we're both heavily impacted by this sort of work. So first thing we did is we flattered the strong personality and helped him find a passion elsewhere. So we knew he liked systems work, so he became our sysops team. And he'd actually identified the need, so to encourage him was in everyone's best interest, really. It's not that he was a bad person or a bad developer. It just wasn't much of a team player and not really interested in the ideas other people had. He was a manager, really, rather than a leader. And the company had a vision to be a true flat structure. And so removing this personality allowed others to grow and change the dynamic enough to kickstart the vision. And we really started to see that people were coming out of their shells.
So we found ourselves a great Scrum coach who suggested that Scrum but doesn't work. And by that, he meant that if you take away any part of the Scrum process, you end up doing Scrum but no planning, for example, then the whole process doesn't really work. So now we're really strict at following the whole process in our development teams. We estimate stories in good time before the sprint starts to make sure they start smoothly. We agree that the work we're going to do with the product owners, so as a development team, we see ourselves as a stakeholder in IAPTUS from a technical sense. So an example of this was recently we would be working with the product owners to give us some sprint time to work an ORM into the system. So that included on selling them the benefits of that. We sprint plan as a team, so we drill down into stories to get a clear idea of how long it's going to take to complete, to make sure the whole team is invested in the same solution, and also make sure that once we've gone into a bit more detail that that's actually going to fit into our sprint. sprint review allows all of our project stakeholders to see the final output of a sprint story. So this happens at the end of a sprint. Of course, this is more of a final formal run-through because we're working closely with the product owners and other stakeholders through the sprint to make sure that we're on the right track anyway. And we're really strict about having our sprint retrospectives at the end of after the review because that contributes to our policy of continuous improvement. So we look back at what did and didn't work and adjust for the next sprint accordingly. And that includes celebrating what went well and what we were successful at as well, so we don't forget that and we carry on doing it. We work as a team, not a group of individuals. So we follow the belief that no matter how good a developer you are, you're not as good as several developers working together to achieve a common goal. And that means using some of these things. So group design sessions. If software is designed as a team up front, then the whole team is invested in the solution. Every team member has a say in shaping that solution and will understand what needs to be done when it actually comes to coding it. Code reviews. We don't code review because we don't trust each other. We code review because we understand we're all humans and humans make mistakes. But it's also a great way that we can learn from each other as well. 2 different people code review every line that's written. And although that sounds like a big time investment, it means that we can save time from bug fixes and catchable mistakes later on. And it helps keep the new reputation we've gained with our customers. We tend to pair program more often than not. So this is mostly for the same reason as the other things I mentioned. It helps with the shared understanding that we've got in the project that we're building. But there's an educational part to it as well. So whether you're driving or instructing in the pair, you've got a lot to learn from someone else's coding style, no matter whether they're a new developer or whether they've got a lot of experience. And we occasionally even mob program. So that's getting the whole team to code something together. This is obviously a really expensive way of carrying out development work, so we don't do it that often. But if we're using a new technology or working in the new, with a new part of the system and needs to speed that knowledge, level up on that knowledge really quickly, it works really well. So while making changes to the development process, the company is going through a transition to remove our hierarchy. We looked at how we were working as a company and realized that having certain people in charge just really wasn't working for us. We found that they were making decisions without consulting the rest of the team. And after a while, we realized that these weren't the best decisions that could have been made, actually. As the company started to grow, we decided to try a new approach where teams would collaborate on decisions and people would no longer be responsible for making them alone. So even the directors were really bought into this. They decided to collaborate on most decisions as a separate team with the company. And they only really have a final say in large decisions that would affect the whole company and cost a huge amount of money. So our recent office move is an example of that. So in practice, this looks like our development team working closely with our product owners to prepare the work. We work with our ops team to make sure that our systems are running efficiently. And we work with our account managers on specific customer requests and bug reports. These teams in turn can raise issues with us, and depending on the size of the issue we're raising, we have processes for getting them into our work streams. And we found we haven't missed having managers at all, because the environment we're in allows us to do what we do best.
So with all of this, it came with implementing a process. So process can sometimes be seen as an enemy or an evil in software development, or actually for any business for that fact, tying down people with bureaucracy for the sake of it. But we really believe the right process for the right reasons can transform the way you work. So we started off with Google spreadsheets and started with a 2-tab spreadsheet. 1 tab with all the unreleased branches, which was a direct copy of GitHub, and 1 tab for the proposed branches to go into the next release. And then along with that, all the other information you might want to track, like where the status, whether it been code reviewed and all that sort of stuff. It kind of started to give us some structure and visibility and started to aid for the communication, kind of somewhere that we could all look to find information. Initially, Dave and I would spend a lot of time reviewing everything. In fact, it ended up being a full-time job of reviewing everyone's work before we merged. We agreed on a definition of done, however, found that there were widely different interpretations of what those statements actually mean. We formally introduced peer review. Dave's already touched on this, but I kind of wanted to bring it up again, noting that it did become the formal part of the process. There had to be evidence to prove that it had been done, and it was a really good start in reducing the number of bugs that we released. So we looked at continuous integration as well. So we started out with Jenkins, but very quickly moved to a hosted version of Bamboo. However, found that Bamboo would, because it was hosted locally, gave us a whole host of other issues, and that was mainly down to the connection with Selenium Grid, giving us failures when nothing had gone wrong with our test or our code. But at least we had the start of an automated test suite. So that was good. And another thing that we started fairly early on in the process was the interrogation of tests. So we managed to vastly reduce the number of Selenium tests, which made the build time a lot quicker, and replaced those in favor of integration and unit tests. This did take quite a long time to do, but it was definitely worth it. And then we made our acceptance tests more focused to what we actually wanted them to test and our main parts of the system, and kind of used more appropriate tests to cover those tests that we'd kind of gotten rid of. And then we iterated on it. And bear in mind, kind of what I'm talking about here is probably the best part of half a decade's worth of work. Very hard to put it down into a couple of slides. So we made our process even better. So we didn't want to live with spreadsheets for the rest of our life. So we kind of introduced Jira into our workflow to ensure that all developers followed the same process, so that we're all doing code reviews and pull requests and all the other bits and pieces that come with it. We changed our branching structure to something that fits better with our team. So we started with a Git flow pattern, and that did change over time. And this ensured consistent quality regardless of experience. And it gave us much more confidence that everything had been scrutinized to the same level. So we had to focus around risk management, and I kind of I'll touch on it at the end when I'm talking about ISO 27001. So we started grouping together releases by type of issue. So features and hotfixes were separated into different releases. Features require notice in our company, which means that they have to wait to be released. Hotfixes don't. And if they're separate, that means that they're not blocked by the features, meaning we can deliver value to the customer earlier. And we've also had to spend some time assessing our releases against a risk matrix so that we could understand the impact and mitigations that we might not put in place, and actually affected the way that we would develop code. And it's a really valuable learning experience actually to bring that in. It's changed a lot of the way that we develop code. We shuffled our teams around quite a bit. I mean, the Mayden guys in the audience will know, like, we've been 3 teams, then 4 teams, then back to 3 teams. But we've tried a whole host of complements of people, different sizes, until we found teams that worked well together. And I think what we've got at the moment works really well, not just in our teams, but as a development team as a whole. And maybe a year or 2 into the kind of 8 years that we're talking about, we added more members into the release team. Oliver. And as I mentioned, it was difficult for even 2 people to look after this work. And the responsibilities didn't fit right. it's not fair for two people to review 15 to 20 people's work. And actually looking back, it's ridiculous that we ever thought that was something that we should be doing. So we opened up to more members and appointed 2 more people, so that we had one release team member per team. Vastly reduced our workload, and we had more people understanding the issues that we were facing, meaning that there was more people to tackle the problems going forward. So we also looked at CI. So we moved from our hosted Bamboo to Travis, and the difference was monumental. It was probably one of the biggest changes that we've made as a company. The Selenium grid integration wasn't an issue, and we would reliably have test suites passing when they should pass and failing when they should fail, almost all the time. Ultimately meaning that we weren't getting blocked from releasing our code, which is what we want, and that means better reputation with our customers. And then I just wanted to touch on the ISO 27001 certification. So in our industry, it's expected that we're serious about information security, and we're careful about our software changes. And this certification proves that we adhere to those standards. Documenting and living what I've mentioned above was a huge piece of the jigsaw for the certification. So kind of wanted to add a slide, and this happened again throughout the 8-year period. We involved people into the process more as the process went along. So initially, we just expected all the developers to accept it, and realised that developers needed to be invested and not dictated to. I mean, kind of like going back to the guy at the beginning that we repurposed. So to this point, it felt like work had just been flung over the wall, but this gave everybody the opportunity to have their voice and collaborate, and it felt, much better. And we kind of emphasised that we should all be invested, as we're all responsible for getting the work out to the clients at the end of the day. And at this point, it was more of a facilitation role rather than a management role, which is exactly where we wanted to get to. I think we wish we'd just done that sooner. And then we involved our product owners more. So until really late in the iterations, actually, they weren't involved very much. And we've seen involved realising them made the whole process better. So product owners would take responsibility for sign-off, which was previously a release team thing. So they had a step in the process which was more relevant to their role. And then that means they were in greater control of releasing to the clients in the timescales that they'd promised, as they were responsible for the step in the process.
So as well as our development and release processes, we were also working on improving our code base. Around 2 years ago, we split off from our legacy code base and started all new PHP development in Slim framework. We chose Slim because of the ability to easily swap out components. That allows us to keep our options open in the future if we decide that any particular component isn't quite working for us, so the router or the DI container, for example. All new front-end components are being written in React, which has vastly reduced the number of browser-specific front-end issues we're having. And using React's presentational markup language, JSX, we've now split away from our presentation code from our domain logic. And because of these stack changes, we've been able to write tests for all new PHP and JavaScript with high coverage. So in practice, this has transformed our code base into something that allows us to develop features much more rapidly than before. And we're shipping with far fewer bugs, thanks to rarely having to touch that legacy code base anymore. So you might be wondering, how do you make decisions on things when we've got no managers to do that for us? We invented working groups, and they exist to make decisions across all the teams that traditionally managers would make in a hierarchy. The idea is that members of a working group are experts in that group subject, or they're the most interested and keen to learn about that, so the best place to make those decisions. Instead of one person imposing decisions made from one point of view, decisions are agreed by a group of experts with different opinions, giving us something a lot more valuable as a result. So we've got technical working groups, so such as our database working group, front end and testing working groups. And then we've got company level ones as well. So, and these are often non-technical. So we've got one, for example, that decides how career progression works at Mayden. And then we have task and finish groups, which exists for as long as a project needs it to. So this is useful for things like our current upgrade to PHPSW, which in a code base as large as Aptus is a really big challenge. It's no easy feat. The group obviously has developers in it, but it's also got product owners who champion the work with their team to help get that work into our sprints. And we even see project architecture as something to be solved in a group. So what we internally call our technical roadmap working group was set up to address the need for some kind of coherent long-term technical vision. And its job is to fill the gap that would traditionally be filled by a project architect. The group breaks down big epic stories and explores high-level solutions that may solve other similar problems. And this allows us to give our product owners a rough idea of how long these bigger stories are going to take to complete. These designs are passed from group members back to teams via sprints, and they get iterated and improved on during sprints. And then we also work with strategy and roadmap teams to work out if we can build more generic solutions to solve multiple problems at once. We don't necessarily see a need for a systems architecture to be an experienced or senior developer discipline. Often more experienced developers will spot advantages and disadvantages of particular solutions that as they develop their career. But we found that less experienced developers are thriving in this group as well, spotting issues that more experienced people seem to easily miss. So we haven't found a need for a CTO, and we believe the solutions we come up with are better because of our collaborative approach. We're all reasonable people and generally manage to come to a consensus or agreement pretty quickly.
So a lot of what we do at Mayden is all around this phrase, continuous improvement. We don't believe there's such thing as perfect. Everything and anything has the opportunity to change. And what was a solution once might only take you so far as the company grows and you gain more understanding. So our process has taken 4 fairly major changes as an example. So retrospectives require everybody to be honest. Without this, you can't improve. So recently within our team, we've had a retrospective which talked about tone of voice, body language, and active listening. And this means our conversation is now far more effective and we spend time on conversations that matter. And everything that we've mentioned beforehand are all examples of continuous improvement. And they're all centered around doing what feels right to drive change. And everybody at Mayden is encouraged to make change happen if something doesn't feel right. So we don't have managers. No one's technically in charge. And we make decisions together. So you might think there's no place for leadership. But there are leaders. Certain people emerge as people who take responsibility and ownership. They ensure that change happens, involve the right people, and own it until it's working. And they often influence those around them so that they're invested and not just passengers. In practice, this means that you'll find that they coach their teammates, helping them find their own solutions rather than telling them what to do. They influence, encourage their teams in a positive way. They respect people thinking differently is a good thing and can contribute to the overall success. And they really try and encourage that. And they do all of that without the need for a title.
So just to summarise what we've talked about, although it's not always the right solution, a process can go a long way in fixing a pain point in a team. Leading people doesn't mean micromanaging people. It's about taking ownership of the project, collaborating well, and setting an example through positive influence. Working together means designing solutions together, pair programming, testing, and working towards the same goal. Sitting in a room and coding in silence on the same project isn't teamwork. And if you're unhappy about something, find the right people to help you positively drive change. And don't sit still. Keep carving out time to look at how you do things and look for more ways to improve. Any questions?
How do you do things like salary negotiations?
So interestingly, we have a working group to work out how we have those conversations now. But yeah, conventionally it's just been going to the director and asking for more money. It's as simple as that, really.
Our directors are great people to talk to, so we've found that usually they're very approachable, and if you've got a problem like that, they're quite receptive to talking about it.
I've also found actually that generally people recommend each other because everyone's working together. Yeah. When people do good, like somebody else in the team doing really well, quite often team members will recommend other people for the same reasons.
I see, right. Okay.
Do you have a working group that resolves problems that a working group couldn't resolve?
That's working group inception, so yeah.
We have an overarching view of everything that the working groups are producing, but that's mostly just to prioritise all of that work and what we should do first. We haven't found a problem that to be a particular problem yet.
How do you make decisions in the group? Is the democracy thing, or at the end someone decides? You have like, is it split 5 people in the group, 3 to 2, so done, that's decided. How does it work?
So we usually find we come to a consensus. There's a lot of stuff in Scrum in retrospectives, for example, lots of games you can play and things like that. So sometimes you use those tools to help aid a conversation, but we usually just have good, honest conversations, whiteboard loads of stuff, and usually common sense kind of prevails, which, yeah.
Try and make data-driven decisions.
Yeah, make decisions, with data and all that stuff.
But sometimes you do get
similar opinions in a way it could be like biased, so easier to make it. It's actually people with different opinions that come to a consensus.
Yeah, sometimes you do get to a stalemate where you get people disagreeing, and but kind of the way to resolve that usually is to say, well, let's just try something, let's try one of them. If it doesn't work, then we'll change it.
We have the decision-making process as well. Yeah. Which, if you want to elaborate on that.
No, that's a great point, Oliver.
So we have a company-level decision-making process that's kind of working through things like, have you talked to the right people? You making it on your own, that kind of thing.
Have you got evidence to back it up, and all that? Yeah. And then likewise, you've got the flip side of that is a challenge process, that if you don't feel like a decision has been well thought out for any one of those reasons, they haven't adhered to the decision-making protocol, if you like, then you've got the opportunity to challenge that. Again, you have these things in place, but it all comes back to like decent people with common sense. And that's it. When you whittle it down. But
How do you stop dominant personalities from overbearing and encourage introvert personalities to come in this process?
I like to think that we've changed the culture enough over the years that that's not been a problem. It's definitely not a problem at the moment. We've changed our hiring process quite a lot to kind of see how people are going to fit in, as well as the job they can do.
What does that look like, that change in the hiring process?
So we got a psychologist in, and we got them to help us come up with a load of questions that really teases out a lot of what people are really feeling when they're actually in an interview, and that's helped a lot.
Also, if you do get those situations in the sprints where you get to those difficult conversations, especially within our team, if that's happening, because we all have those bad days anyway, people call them out on it, or they talk about it in the retrospective, and then it usually gets better the next time round. So yeah, it's just about being honest with each other, really. Sky at the back.
Sorry.
Do you have a process for communicating decisions across your whole team, rather than it being, you might have a working group that makes a decision over here, but that information could be siloed. How do you get the decision out of the whole group?
So all decisions are documented, but obviously not everyone reads that. We try to make sure all the working groups have delegates from every team. So when meetings are finished, they'll go back and they'll just give a quick summary of the decisions that have been made and what's happened within the meeting.
that kind of answers what I was going to ask. But I was going to ask, what ways do you, what do you do towards pushing diversity within the working groups, other than just having representatives from each community? Try and have a mix of seniority and experience or background. And do you include non-devs in working groups?
Totally, yeah. So there's working groups for a whole range of things, and I think if there's a particular working group where you feel like you're missing not trying to think of the right word, but you're missing a particular mind or a particular person, then you try and encourage them to come along. I mean, these are all like open groups, so as many or as little people can turn up to them. But yeah, I think if you feel the need for it, then you just get them in.
Our front-end working group's a good example of that. So we've got our UI developer who works separate from the development teams, comes and joins us for those meetings.
Did you have to sell this at the director level, or were they on board with this?
They're pretty much on board with it straight away. Our managing director, founder, he really believes about this flat structure, so really pushing it, and he's good at kind of articulating that and making sure the whole company's brought into it, and we have a lot about this at our staff days and throughout the year. Does that answer your question? Yeah.
Any more? Cool, thank you very much.
Thank you.